Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have my first monthly wrap up for 2025, which is a format I have not used in a very long time. So we're going to see how this one goes. I'm going to play around with a few things and maybe have to adjust come the end of February, but it is currently the 1st of February, so I am 100% done with the month. And that's the thing that's going to be different kind of with these wrap-ups, is that I am going to film them after the month has ended so that you get a realistic picture of my reading month. So the monthly wrap-ups are going to feature some basic stats for the month, as well as any reviews for review copies of books that I received, an overview at everything that I've read, as well as probably my top reads of the month, just so that this doesn't become really long. So just in case this does blow out, maybe get comfy, get yourself a drink, stay cool if you're in the Southern Hemisphere because it's really hot this weekend, or wrap yourself up if it's cold where you are, and settle in. And we're going to talk about my reading in January. So in January, I read 80 books, which is a mixture of both adult and children's titles. I actually forgot to work out the percentage of adult versus kids titles, but it tends to be fairly even in its split. And January was also my summer holidays, so I had a lot of time, not a whole lot of plans, and I just wanted to read. And you'll have seen that through the various reading projects that I shared throughout January, where I was grouping books together in different ways and trying things out. And I honestly had a lot of fun. With those 80 books, I read 14,861 pages. I had 6 rereads. 2 were Ilona Andrews rereads and 4 were picture book rereads, mostly as school started back this week, and they're books that I tend to read at the start of the year. I DNF'd 19 books in January, and most of those came through try chapter videos, of which you have already seen 1, but technically 3 have already been filmed. So the bulk of the DNFs came through trying the first chapters of books, working out whether or not I really want to continue them. I was making use of my Kindle Unlimited subscription, and this month, minus my subscription cost, I saved $69.45 Australian, and through my local library, mostly through audiobooks that I was listening to, I saved $188. And if you're wondering how I work out that particular stat, I literally just go and get whatever the recommended retail price for an audiobook is and just tally all of that up. I read 39 physical books, 27 ebooks, and I had 13 audiobooks in the month. Alrighty, so this is going to be the part that's a little bit tricky. I did test it out to see in editing if I could make this work and I could do it in a reasonable way, because I'm going to show you everything that I read in the month. I'm not going to talk about the books, but I'm just going to show you. So hopefully what you're seeing now is all of the children's titles that you've read, and I've kind of tentatively broken them up into children's picture books and also the middle fiction or the young adult titles that featured. So the novels will probably be right underneath this video, except for one picture book that I needed to squeeze in there, so I had to make space. I'm going to come back and talk about a few more of these in a moment when I do my reviews, because there were quite a few kids review titles this month. But it was a really great reading month for kids titles for me, which it always is in January when I have time just to get into them. And quite a few of my favorites from the month came from this section of my reading. All right, and then we have my project books. So these were all books that either have already featured in videos or will be featuring in videos coming out in February. So I have read all of them. I have reviews for them either up or coming out. And it was a mixed bag. It was a mixed bag. There were some really great success books in here, and then there were some really ordinary books as well, which always happens. I thought that this would be a nice way to kind of say, hey, yeah, I've actually talked about all of these books, and I will leave all of the videos that these books feature in linked in the description, because part of the reason why I'm changing up my structure this year and why I'm doing more project-based vlogs and a monthly wrap-up is to kind of minimize overlap in terms of my reviews. I will say probably the most successful reading vlog is the one that features First Nations authors, which is coming out in February. So I hope that you will pop in and watch that one a little bit later in the month. There were no losses in that video, and I was just so thrilled. All right, and then we come to the books that I have not talked about in any videos so far. At least I don't think I have, aside from the 2 Kate Daniels books, which I've talked about ad nauseum for the last couple of years. So there is Thick as Thieves by Megan Whalen Turner, which I have talked about. I'm doing the read along with Heather for the Queen's Thief read along, and this is the penultimate book. So in February, we're reading the final book. There is a book of poems. This is by a former Iraqi soldier who moved to Australia, and his reflections on being a soldier and the effects of that and the trauma involved in what he has seen. And it was a very poignant and very powerful little collection of poems. There's Love of the Game by Zabo, which is a hockey romance. I picked it up just because it's one of the most recent releases from them, and I have previously enjoyed their hockey romances. It was a very enjoyable little story, and I'm hoping to continue it at some point. We have the Storm Boy series by N.R. Walker, which I'm going to come back to in a moment, so I'm just going to to say that I did read it. That Island Feeling by Karina May, which I was supposed to include in my summer reading vlog. I read it while I was filming my summer reading vlog and then just never talked about it. It is a contemporary Australian romance. It is set on an island and it features two people who are dealing with a lot of guilt and grief and trauma, and who find each other and find that they have a connection and it helps them both to heal. Then there are a couple of books that I just found on Libby and I grabbed out as audiobooks. So there were Songs for the Dead and the Living by Sara M. Saleh, and it was a really poignant family story about prejudice and about having to move around and having to constantly carve out a space for yourself and even keep part of your identity hidden for your safety and for the safety of your family. There is also The City Born Great Again, which is an N.K. Jemisin story, which was a really interesting story about the birth of a city and kind of the being that helps that to come about. There is The President's Brain is Missing by John Scalzi, which is just a short story and was just very John Scalzi-like in its humor and probably very poignant for the moment because literally the president's brain is missing and he doesn't know it. Sound familiar? There was Spectacular by Stephanie Garber, which is part of the Caraval series, so I bought it. It's a beautiful copy of the book. I've always enjoyed that series, even if it's, you know, not the greatest work of YA literature out there. It's just a fun story. This is set during the holidays and was just cute. Like, it's nothing to write home about, but it was definitely enjoyable to revisit these characters. Annibot, which I read, it was part of the Goodreads Choice Awards this year. It is a sci-fi story about a very human-like robot who is the romantic partner of somebody else, and that's her designed purpose. But throughout the course of the story, we see that she really has become very human-like in terms of the way that she thinks and the way that she develops and the way that she learns and grows, and what does that mean for her as being a possession of somebody else. It was really interesting. I don't think it's doing anything new in that kind of space, but it was a very interesting story, but just heavy content warnings for what would essentially be domestic abuse. And that kind of calls into question that line of, is that the case if she is not human? And what does human mean in this instance? So I found it really interesting. I kind of wish it had done a few things differently, but I'm glad I read it. I also picked up 3 more books in the Linear Tactical series by Janie Crouch. So I read Baby Storm and Redwood, and these are all small town romantic suspense stories with alpha heroes who all work at this kind of security place that trains private security and runs self-defense classes and whatnot. It's one of my series that I'm continuing this year, so I have only, I think, 4 more books left in this series to complete after this. In a Rush, I'm going to talk about in a moment. That's by Kate Canterbary. It's her new book coming out this month. I think it might even come out to the day that this video goes live. And I also read Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. The first book I've read by them, I really enjoyed it. I had it out as an audiobook and I found it really interesting. I quite like the writing style and I'm definitely going to come back and read some more. So like, that's a general overview of the things that I haven't talked about, but some I am going to touch on in more depth are the books that I received for review, because the publishers and authors and whoever have taken time out to actually send these books to me, to give me physical copies, and that means I want to shout them out. I want to talk about them on this channel, in this forum, because I think that's important. So the first one I have is Croc Candy by Claire Thompson and illustrated by Deborah Brown. This is the story of Angus, who is a real person who lives here in Australia. He lives in the Northern Territory. He is currently, I think, about 14 years old, but this story is set when he's just a little bit younger. And he is diagnosed with dyslexia and he struggles at school, but what he figures out is that he can use his dyslexia as a superpower, and he actually becomes an entrepreneur. He absolutely loves crocodiles and he ends up coming up with a croc candy idea, literally a kind of lolly that he can sell, and that becomes his small business. And it's about his journey, his process, how he tested and tried recipes, how he started just selling them to people, and how it became a real business that he now runs. And it was a great little story. It's a wonderful one to add to any collection. I think it's really great for kids who want to see that, you know, just because you're young doesn't mean you can't make a difference in the world. Some of his profits are then also donated to a organization that works with kids with dyslexia. So a really great story. Then we have 3 titles from Alan and Unwin, so thank you very much to them for the review copies. The first one is Searching for Treasure by Joanna Bell and Emma Long. This is a really gorgeous story about a day at the beach and about searching the beach and finding all of the little treasures that you can find as they wash up on the shore. It is part fiction, part non-fiction. I quite like the way that this one has been designed because there are little cutout pages as well, and you get to explore the rock pools and the shoreline, and you have the narrative at the top, but also throughout the text there are tiny, you may not even be able to see them here, tiny little sections of text that give little snippets of information about what you might find along the shoreline. So it's a beautiful lyrical text. Really enjoyed reading this one. I did say in my review on Kidlit Joy, because all of these books will have individual videos over on Kidlit Joy that I do need to look really closely at that teeny tiny writing. I'm getting to that point in my life where the vision is not quite what it was, but I really enjoyed that kind of hidden story message within a text. There's also a caution. This book contains Deadly Reptiles by Corey Tutt and illustrated by Ben Williams. This is a middle readers nonfiction information text all about the reptiles around Australia. I adored this book. It is one of my favorite kids nonfiction books that I have read in a long time. In this particular book, it is about bringing back some of the Indigenous language before we lose it all, because many of our Indigenous language and language groups in Australia are threatened because there are just not enough native speakers of them anymore. So this book has been broken down into different countries around Australia. So if you're unfamiliar, colonized Australia has states and territories. However, our Indigenous groups are numerous. And this book basically takes all of those countries and tells us what it is. It gives us a bit of a guide for how to pronounce the country. So this is Wamba country. And then for each country, we look at the reptiles that are native to that area. So snakes and lizards and all sorts. There's so much information. It includes the Indigenous name we're known for these animals. The artwork is beautiful. Corey Tutt's writing style is just so engaging. He has incredible voice when he talks about these animals. The deadly in the title refers to the Indigenous slang, which basically means cool. So these are really cool reptiles. And yes, some of them are venomous, some of them are poisonous. That's a thing. We know that about Australia. But the more you read about them, the more that you know about them, the more that you know how to behave when you're in the vicinity of these animals as well. So I loved this. I thought it was really great. I especially loved finding the different Indigenous countries based in Victoria, which is where I live, and reading more about our native reptiles, because there's a few that I know. We used to have a blue-tongued lizard that lived in our backyard when I was growing up. They absolutely terrify you because they just stick their head out from underneath a pot, so they look like a snake, but they're really cool lizards. And I loved reading more about other animals that I probably didn't really understand as much. So this is great. I can't wait to take this into school because there are going to be so many kids who absolutely adore this. Also from Alan and Unwin, they sent me a middle fiction graphic novel. This is Chickenpox by Remy Lai. This is based on Remy Lai's family's experience when she was growing up, when she and her siblings all had chickenpox, but it is a fictionalized version of that from the perspective of a fictionalized version of an older sibling who finds herself stuck in a house with her younger siblings who just drive her absolutely bonkers, and she's having to navigate friendship and social issues while not being able to leave the house. And it was just fun, enjoyable, highly relatable if you have siblings. It was a really great time, and it's a full color graphic novel. It's perfect for anyone who likes someone like Raina Telgemeier. All right, what's next on the review list? There were a lot this month. Like, I was very, very surprised. All right, so another one that has already come out is All the Colors of the Rainbow by Ray White and Sian Danthes, and this is a beautiful book about being who you are. This is the story of Jem, who sometimes loves to wear dresses and sometimes loves to not wear dresses, and who likes girl things and boy things and doesn't really identify as either a girl or a boy. It's about their experiences where people accept that about them and cherish them and love them for that, and sometimes the times when they find that people try and fit them into a box that they don't necessarily belong to. But the whole point is that Jem has the support of their family, who tells them, you know, you're just like the rainbow. You are beautiful no matter what you wear, no matter what you like, no matter what your preferences are. You are a unique individual and you have so much to bring to the table. It's a beautiful book. It's beautifully illustrated. I absolutely loved this one. And it breaks my heart that if that was published in the US, it would probably get banned. That's really frustrating for me. There is My Language Rights by Judy Thompson and Titi Garcia. This one is about children's rights to their languages. So it looks at the PEN International Universal Declaration, oh my gosh, I keep forgetting the full title of this, Universal Declaration of Linguistic Rights. And it's about championing every child's right to have access to their own first language, and how important it is for them to see it in the world around them, for them to use it, for them to be able to use it in classrooms, even if they are learning a second language. And I just love this. I think it's so important. So thank you again to the publisher for this copy. This was Scribble. I think I forgot to say where All the Colours of the Rainbow were from. It was from Hachette. And then we have The Inside Dog by Pip Harry and Caroline Davis, which doesn't come out until the end of this month, but I'm sneaking it in here because I've read it. It is about Cuddles, who is an inside dog and who finds it really difficult to do things outside. They are a creature of comfort. And when the family goes on a holiday to a farm, they suddenly find themselves outside with the farm dogs. And that's a experience that they're not really ready to have yet until they are, and they realize that there is a whole new world out there. There are new friends that they can make, and that they can be brave and have courage and try new things. So it's a gorgeous little book, perfect for anyone who likes dogs, but also for anyone who needs a story about being brave and taking a risk. Okay, and then we come to 2 adult review titles I had. So the first one was Not Catching Love by Saxon James. This is the final book in the Accidental Love series, and it's probably been the one relationship that we've seen develop over the course of multiple books and have been waiting for. It is Xander and Derek's story, and I most recently talked about this in my Books That Match My Nail Color vlog, so I have done a full review of it. But in summary, Xander is a character who suffers from panic attacks, and he has a very small number of people who are able to help him manage those panic attacks, and one of those people is Derek, who is a nurse who works at a local clinic. It becomes really clear that there is an attraction between Xander and Derek, but obviously because Derek is treating him, it's a severe conflict of interest and something that should not be occurring. And so this book is them figuring out how to develop this relationship, because Xander is determined to make Derek fall for him, but Derek is very aware of his profession and how that looks to outsiders. And so a lot of the book they actually spend apart. So Derek spends a lot of time nursing overseas and gets some life perspective, and Xander also needs to find his perspective because he's dealing with a lot. There is a lot of trauma in his background. There is some trauma dumping within the book, so be aware of that. There's a lot of content warnings for this one, but it is a book about them both needing to figure out what it is that they want and how they can do that, and how they can do it in a way that doesn't jeopardize someone's career and reputation. And we have a lot of time with all of the other side characters we've met in the series, so it's a really great conclusion and wrap up to that. And I'm kind of sad because these characters are finished in terms of this series, although more than likely, knowing Saxon James, they'll pop up in other series at various points in time. But for now, their stories are complete, and it was a good time, even if it is a very emotionally hard-hitting kind of book. And then the final review copy I had was In a Rush by Canterbary, which I was sent as part of the review team for this book, and I loved it. It is a contemporary romance. It is set in the same world as In a Jam. It is the second book in the series, and it is Emmy's book. So Emmy is a teacher at the same school that Shay from the first book was at originally, and her best friend is Ryan, who is a professional NFL footballer. He is one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the entire NFL, and they don't see each other all the time, but they kind of text and message each other every now and then. And on Ryan's birthday, his 30th birthday, she sends him a message and he asks if they can catch up. And this is just after she's found her boyfriend cheating on her, and so she is really upset and disappointed in basically people. And Ryan reminds her that they had a pact that if neither of them were married when they were 30 years old, they were going to marry each other. And he offers this as a potential solution to the fact that she has to go to the wedding of one of her best friends, where she's the maid of honor and her cheating ex is the best man. And she's the peacekeeper of her group. She tries to make sure that everyone is okay. So she's just said, no, that's fine. We'll get through it, blah, blah, blah. But Ryan's like, well, how about we get back at him and I'll be your date and we can tell everyone we're engaged, and in exchange, you can come to some events with me. I'm close to retiring. I'm thinking about buying a soccer team, and for some reason, you know, the people who are selling want to see a family-friendly version of me because, you know, romance books. And it kind of progresses from there. And this one does suffer a little bit from the miscommunication trope, but it was just as fun as In a Jam. I don't know if it quite tops In a Jam for me, but it was definitely a 5-star read. I just thoroughly enjoyed Kate Canterbury's writing style in this particular world. And I like that we got to spend so much time with a lot of the other side characters from In a Jam. So Jamie in particular is one of my favorite characters. She's another teacher at the school and she was Shay's best friend, but she's also really good friends with Emmy and just offers some off-the-wall advice at times. And Shay, Noah and Jenny do appear in this book as well, and Jenny is just as delightful as a small child who swears a lot should be. So I had a great time and I was really pleased to be part of the review team and to get an early copy of the book because I was just hooked from the moment I started reading. Alrighty, this video is going really long, so I'm gonna have to rethink this format. My goodness. The last thing that I'm going to touch on are any 5 or 6 star books that I had this month. So my 6 stars were obviously my Kate Daniels rereads. I don't think I had any. Oh no, I did have one other 6-star read. I'm just going to very briefly talk about because you'll hear my full thoughts as I read it in another video in February. But it is Always Was, Always Will Be by Thomas Mayo. This is a non-fiction book. It is Thomas Mayo writing about what we do next after the referendum that we most recently had in Australia for an Indigenous voice to Parliament didn't go through. Thomas Mayo was a big part of the Yes campaign for that, and this is him reflecting on kind of what he's learned from that process, the history of activism within Indigenous Australia over time, and also the next steps that we take. But it comes from such a place of hope for moving forward, because as he says in the book, 41% of the Australian population who could vote voted yes for a voice to Parliament. And while that's not a majority, it wasn't just the Indigenous vote, because the Indigenous population are far less of the main percentage of that voting group. So there is a lot of support for the yes campaign, and sometimes the people who voted no, it was not because they didn't want one, it's just that they didn't understand what that meant and they wanted more information. So this book aims to kind of fill that gap and to look at, you know, how can we continue to push for that moving forward? And there's some really great tips in it. So I really love this. The writing in it is amazing. Thomas Mayo has a great style of writing that really is engaging and brings you along as the reader and says, you know, okay, this is how we can make a difference moving forward. So I loved this. I did say I would come back to the Storm Boys series. So I read the 3 books, or the 3 novels in the Storm Boys series, which is a contemporary romance set in the Northern Territory. We have Tully and we have Jeremiah. One of them loves to storm chase and the other is a meteorologist who is studying lightning. And Into the Tempest is the second book in the series, and it was my favourite one in the series. It's actually based in Darwin. So in the first book, they are out chasing storms to gather data for, I think, Jeremiah's project. And it's where they develop their relationship and where a lot of things happen, because we learned from the very start that Jeremiah was struck by lightning, so he's always been fascinated by storms, and he can kind of sense when a storm or a lightning strike is about to happen, and it's kind of this like sixth sense. They find themselves in the middle of the Northern Territory, in the middle of nowhere, experiencing these storms. Into the Tempest is them committing to their relationship, and Jeremiah committing to moving to the Northern Territory. He's originally, I think, from Melbourne or Sydney. I think it's from Melbourne. He finds himself in charge of the local meteorology office, which is horrendously outdated. And just after he arrives, they get a tropical cyclone warning. And it is one of the biggest tropical cyclones that the Northern Territory will have experienced in a long time. And it is kind of what happens then. And the small community up there banding together, and when things go wrong because they're using really old technology, how Jeremiah is actually able to help that community and get information out even in the height of the storm. I really enjoyed it because, one, I really am fascinated by storms, so I kind of like anything to do with that. But I also liked how, particularly in the second book, we start to build a found family around Jeremiah. So Tully has a family there. His family are great. They're amazing. And Jeremiah has never really had that. And so he's experiencing that for the first time. And I always love that kind of thing in a kind of setting in a story. But then it's also set against a really catastrophic natural disaster. And that then flows on again into the third book when they're still dealing with the after effects of the cyclone. So I really enjoyed that one. In a Rush was also in my top list. And then the last 3 books that made it into my top list were all middle fiction titles. So I finally finished The Wild Robot Protects by Peter Brown. This is the 3rd book in the Wild Robot series. And this one looks at an environmental catastrophe. There's a toxic spill in the ocean and it starts to threaten the island that Roz is living on. And so Roz sets out to try and find out what is causing it and how to stop it. And it's all of our favourite characters from the previous Wild Robot books sort of coming together to help Roz, but also Roz learning her new limits and demonstrating that even a robot can have humanity. And when we find out what is going on, which happens to do with mining, and, you know, that mining has to do with the creation of robots, there's a lot to think about. I just loved it. I think Peter Brown has a great writing style and I thoroughly enjoy the series. I also absolutely adored Willowdean by Catherine Applegate, who I didn't realise was K.A. Applegate because I read all of the Animorph books when I was a kid, so that was a delight to find out. And this one is the story of Willowdean, who loves creatures of all kinds. She lives in this world, but there are some creatures that have existed in her town. So this is a fantasy world that people don't like because they smell bad and whatever. And so they've hunted them basically almost to extinction. What they don't realize when they're doing this is that has a huge flow-on effect to the local ecological system. And by hunting down these animals that they don't like, they've caused animals that bring in tourists year after year to their little town to leave the area, because there was a kind of symbiotic relationship in terms of how they lived within the local forest area. And when Willowdean gets a small handmade gift something happens, something a little bit magical, and suddenly she is looking after the last of one of these creatures that has been hunted. It's the story of how she helps her town to realize the importance of these creatures, which I absolutely adored. There are so many beautiful lines in this book, and one of my favorite came just on page 12, and it was, "The earth is old and we are not, and that is all you must remember." And I think that's something that we all need to keep in mind. And then finally, I had The Lost Library by Rebecca Stead and Wendy Mass. This book was just gorgeous. So this is about a little free library that pops up in a town. This town has lost their previous library. It burnt down, and we follow a few different characters, including Evan, who is a young boy who becomes enamored by this little library. He ends up taking some books from it and discovers that one of the books was his father's favorite book when he was a young child, because all he sees is his father's name in the checkout card on the back. And then he also has another book which seems to have been checked out by a very famous mystery author, and both of them were returned on the same day that the fire happened. Our other character is Mortimer, which is this giant cat who kind of looks after the library and treats it as his own. And then you have Al, who is a ghost librarian, who is the one filling the library shelves, and we look at the connection between all of these characters and their connection to the fire. It was just beautiful. I loved everything to do with this because it has just such a love and passion for libraries, librarians, books, and for connecting people to the right book to help them find their answers. I loved it. It was great. So that's a lot of talking, and I haven't even touched on my bingo board from Hell update, so we're going to do those super quickly. So if you're not familiar, this is a challenge hosted by Winn from Literary Diversions. I have set myself 9 challenges for the year. These are the challenges and where I'm up to them. So I have the challenge to read 100% of my pre-2025 TBR. So this started at 50 books and I've currently read 26% of those books. I have the challenge to read 75 audiobooks and I have read 13 of them. I have a video challenge, which is to film and upload 12 try chapter videos this year. One has currently been uploaded. I have 2 more that have been filmed. One is scheduled, one I need to still edit and schedule. So I've technically done 3, but only 1 has gone up. So this only counts for 1 at the moment, but that number will go up in February. I have 12 series that I want to finish or catch up on. I have completed one of those series. That is the Stormboy series by N.R. Walker. So I've completed 1 series and I'm almost through a second. I have the challenge to read 80% of my monthly TBR every month. So I did complete this. I read everything except for Pucking Wild, which I knew I possibly wouldn't get to. It was my annotation book for the month. And I think I said that when I filmed the video originally. I didn't know if I was going to get to it, and I didn't, but that's okay because I will circle back to that later this year. I have the challenge to read 50 junior fiction, middle grade or young adult titles, and I've currently read 14. I have the challenge to read 75% of my 2025 acquisition TBR, so books that I buy this year. That list is currently sitting at 41 books because there were a few little things that happened in January where I acquired a lot of books. It always happens in January because it's just the holidays. I have vouchers and things like that. So the number is excessive, but I have read 34.14% of those books already. So I'm not worried. I have the challenge to read 20 nonfiction titles. I've already read 7 of those. This includes anything that is middle grade or above nonfiction. And I make no excuses for that because middle grade nonfiction is superb. And then I also have the 52 book club challenge. And so far I have read 19 books for that challenge. So this is going really well. Like, I'm thrilled. And that is my monthly wrap up. And I need to rethink this format. This is not going to work for me if I end up with humongously long videos every month. So any suggestions, feel free to leave them down below. Maybe I just need to pull the stats out and just do those quarterly. That might need to happen. We'll see. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed it. If you've read any of these books, feel free to let me know about them down below. If there's anything from the list of books that I read but didn't include in vlogs or projects, but you want to know more information about, let me know. Otherwise, feel free to share either your favorite book that you read in January or a book stack emoji to let me know that you're here. I hope that wherever you're on the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.